I want my colleagues to be able to get settled. You good? Okay, all right, we'll go live. Okay, welcome everyone. We'll call to order this meeting of the Finance Committee for October 17th, 2023. Bill, will you do the roll call, please?
Wilkos,
Here.
Jackson,
Here.
Aniro,
Here.
Lorman,
Here.
Great,
is present.
thank you. Sorry. First item of business is approval of the minutes of the October 3rd, 2023 Finance Committee meeting. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, the minutes as circulated are approved. Next item is the audit of the bills. Bill, do you have any updates? I understand there are 3.
Yeah, I have 3 additions tonight, and just kind of odd things that came up between cycles, and we wanted to get them taken care of. First of them is a TIF payment. It's the second payment for Whispering Pines for their tax increment bond. The payee is actually 2882 Pleasant View Road LLC, and the dollar amount is $77,275.18. The second item is to the town of Westport, and this is for items that were placed on the tax roll as special charges for delinquent sewer items for Westport sewer, but property within the jurisdiction of the city of Middleton. So that's something from the tax roll that we need to pay to Westport to close out. That amount is $23,773.75. And then the final addition is to Block Power. This is the vendor that is doing the block maps as part of the PSC Energy Innovation Grant Program. The amount is $7,500, and that'll be reimbursed by the PSC grant.
All right, thank you. So with those additions, who would like to move approval?
This is Wilkos, I'll move approval.
Lorman will second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the audit of the bills to be paid with the 3 additions that Bill outlined for $77,275.18, $23,773.75, and $7,500, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great, the ayes have it. Moving on to resolutions, we have one resolution 2023-50. I think it should read adjusting compensation for elected officials to keep up with inflation.
This is Jackson. I'll make a motion to approve.
All right, I will second that. Okay, discussion. This is coming to you from Alder Cole and myself. It's pretty straightforward. I shared the draft with my council colleagues on October 1st and explained the rationale. So elected officials in Middleton include the municipal judge, the mayor, and the 8 alders. And our predecessors on previous councils opted to establish compensation for these positions in recognition of all the time that elected officials devote to the city and our constituents. The annual compensation level for mayor and municipal judge was set at $14,400 effective May 1st, 2007. For alders, the annual compensation was set at $5,800 effective 1 year later on May 1st, 2008. Since May 1st, 2008, inflation has gone up 42%. From the 2011 budget to the 2023 budget, the property tax levy went up 71%. Compensation levels for staff have gone up at least 2% per year on average. Insurance premiums have gone up. Pretty much the only thing that hasn't gone up since 2008 is the compensation for elected officials. So in real terms, the compensation for alders is about 71% of what it was in 2008. For the mayor and the judge, it's even less, 68% of the 2007 value. So while the value of everything else has gone up, the value of elected officials' compensation has dropped almost 30%. And while this decline was happening, our population went up 30.7%, which means each alder has around 700 more constituents who contact us to request help, report problems, ask questions, share their views, and ask us to meet with us. And for the mayor, it's over 5,000 more constituents. We have rightfully prioritized increases in pay for city staff because we recognize that inflation has reduced the buying power of their pay, and we want compensation and benefits to be competitive so that our staff will stay with the city. It's only fair that compensation keep up with inflation. And I think it's time we extend the same principle of fairness to the compensation that elected officials receive. So co-sponsored by Alder Cole and myself, this resolution, and Bill, if you'd scroll up to the resolution. This resolution proposes increasing the municipal judges' compensation starting January 1 of 2024. In 2025, compensation for alders would increase on April 15th, and in 2026, the mayor's compensation would increase on April 21st. With the exception of the judge, compensation would not go up for current elected officials unless they're reelected in 2024, 25, or 26. And the effective dates are based on the swearing-in dates for the judge, well, for the alders and the mayor in the respective year. To make sure all the alders are paid the same, the change wouldn't take effect until the odd-numbered alders are sworn in following the 2025 election. That would be the start of year 2 for the even-numbered alders who are elected next year. And the suggested compensation levels are simply what the current rates would have been in August of 2023 if they had been adjusted for inflation. And I use the CPI inflation calculator from the Bureau of Labor Statistics with the amounts reduced or rounded, sorry, to the nearest 100. Our proposed budget, which we're going to be discussing later for 2024, reflects the suggested increase for the judge. Starting next year with the 25 budget, we would need to budget for the increases for alders, and the year after that, the mayor. I believe it is more than possible to do this, and I think it's long overdue. So I welcome thoughts from my colleagues.
That was a very eloquent presentation on what you have to present. I wish that I had more time so I could have written up a good rebuttal, but I don't think that we need to go quite this much. I think what you've put before us is a good starting point, but I don't think that we need to make it a year for year inflation match since 2008. For a couple of different reasons. You cite the uptake in the levy and the taxes, but we're seeing this year that that percentage is way lower than it's traditionally been. We don't know what it's going to look like over the next 3 years and what our tax levy is going to be able to be. So I think while this is a great, in theory, I am a little reticent to approve future money that we don't have. I don't think it needs to be a year for year match in inflation. I think we can maybe bump it up a little bit. I don't personally know of anyone where the salary of the alder makes their decision on whether or not they're going to run. So I don't know how much a factor it plays in somebody's decision to be here. I think a lot of what we do and why we choose to be here comes from our desire to be involved with our city and represent our neighbors. So I don't think that a salary amount really is going to sway anyone either way. But again, I don't know that for a fact. So I would welcome this as a place to start, but I don't think it needs to be a year for year.
Thank you.
They should match.
Other thoughts?
Sure. I do echo exactly what Alder Wolkus stated. I probably take it a little bit further. I just don't think being in public office in a city of this size should really have any kind of financial motivation to it. I don't know. I think I kind of thought about how much time I put in, and probably anywhere between about 15 hours a month, maybe is what I'm putting in. And I just make sacrifices in my life and other aspects to it because I want to be here and want to do it. So I'm not saying not do it, but what I am saying is the same thing. If we're going to think about this, then why are we, going to pay the elected leaders more when I absolutely believe we have to pay our city staff more? They put a lot of time in, an enormous amount of time, and I really think if anybody should get money around here, it should be them, period. I'd like to address some of the language in it a little bit. And the reason being is because we're at a point right now in our society, and especially in the news and the media, where we're taking a very close look at all different groups of people within our society and represented populations. And there's a term out there called positionality, where we are trained to not be not biased. But the reality is, we're the background of our lives and the context of our lives cannot be dismissed in any way whatsoever. So to link a specific group or populations that's cited in here is we're trying to note here every possible, call it underrepresented group within our society, and we're linking them to a financial status, which is wrong. In my life, personally, anti-Semitism has always been front and center. From being persecuted during Easter at school, to having swastikas painted on property, to being accused for killing Jesus. And so anytime we take a group of people and we start labeling them and saying, well, this group is maybe financially challenged, I don't think it's fair. I think what we have to do is say, we want underrepresented people to run for office. There should be no exclusions in any way whatsoever to run for a public office. Yes, it takes some money and it takes some time. And to be frank, a lot of us are sitting here because we can afford to. And that's what it boils down to at the end of the day. Now, is getting $5,400 a year or $6,800 a year going to make that big of a difference in a person's life and their decision to run for office or not? I cannot answer that question. So if we're going to really justify a pay increase, then we need to do it with numbers and facts. And that's all. So I just think we're getting ahead of ourselves on some of this, and that's it.
Thank you. Alder Jackson.
Just reading through this resolution, from what I read, and maybe I read from a different perspective, I don't think it's about the money. I think it's about the, I basically just the principle of how, even in municipalities around us, how every alder is being paid or how everybody alder is being compensated concerning their time. And I think it was brought up that in Middleton, the council or the mayor has not seen this in years. That's my concern. I don't think for me, it's not about the money. I don't think it's about money for anybody. I think it's about the worth and the principle of the whole matter, especially when the alders here are doing the same thing as they're doing in Sun Prairie, Madison, or anywhere else. And those cities don't have a problem with compensating their alders for their time. So I really don't think it's about money. I don't think it's about putting a set group of people in a certain arena. I think it's about just basically being compensated for what's going on in our economic structure in America alone, what's going on, the cost of living and the things that the people are going through, to compensate themselves by putting the time and effort in. I think everybody who ran or who desired to run had a passion to do what they did. So I don't think I could be wrong. I don't think anybody on the council from the mayor on down is saying that, hey, this is a job that I feel that y'all need to pay me for, because I don't think nobody went in with that mentality when they ran for office.
Thank you. I would agree that we all wanted to be here. We all wanted to do this job. We're all making sacrifices. I can tell you I spend more than 15 hours a month just in meetings and prepping for meetings. Which is, just to put it out there that we all put into this what we can. And I'm fortunate in that I am retired, so I have a little more free time. I also have in addition to this committee, I have 2 committees that meet twice a month, and they're pretty involved committees. I think context of our lives cannot be dismissed. I would agree. And if we can't say that the proposed increase is going to make the difference for people to run, why would we automatically assume that it's not going to make a difference? Right? Why would we default to that instead of holding out hope that maybe it would attract some more candidates? I would note that 23 of the last 32 elections were uncontested. And in 2020 and 2021, the entire council was reelected with no challengers. My own position, District 6, had 7 elections in a row, 14 years, at least. It might have gone beyond that. But at least 7 elections in a row, only 1 candidate. So I would like to think that perhaps making it a little more financially feasible for people, perhaps people who need to provide for childcare, people who need to make sure that on council meeting nights, their family has, money to get frozen pizza or takeout, things like that. I'm going to the League of Wisconsin Municipalities meeting so that I can be a better alder and learn more. The city is very generously paying for my registration fee, but I'm paying for my travel and my lodging, and my time is uncompensated. If I were working, I'd have to take days off, and I get paid for those certainly, but those would be days that I would not be able to use towards my vacation. So there are all kinds of reasons to think about increasing the pay. Alder Jackson was comparing us to our peers in other cities. To me, the only peers that we need to compare ourselves to are our peers in 2008 and beyond, because they were making a lot more money than we are right now. Any of us, the judge and the mayor included. And then finally, to the point of paying the staff, I mentioned we're prioritizing increases for the staff. The amount of money that is proposed for increase for the judge and then the alders and then the mayor is, if divided up among all our staff, would be next to nothing. There would not be a significant increase at all. So we're not taking away from the staff by increasing the compensation to elected officials. I am interested in Alder Wokas's suggestion that this dollar amount, the actual increase based on inflation is too much. And I would welcome the opportunity to discuss this further in council when we have our other 4 members here. The full council will consider this with or without a recommendation from the finance committee. So I would like to be able to recommend approval with support from the committee. And if that means not specifying the dollar amounts, I'm okay with that. Otherwise, we could vote on it or actually I could withdraw the motion, but we'd have to vote on that too. So we might as well just vote on whether to forward this with a recommendation or I guess not, if it doesn't prevail. All right, so all those in favor of forwarding resolution 2023-50 to the full council signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed?
No.
No.
All right, so the motion fails. The resolution still is on the council agenda for discussion by our colleagues. All right, moving on to agreements and contracts. The agreement, we have 1. No, we have 2. Agreement with B&E Construction and Remodeling for property maintenance services. This comes to us from the Public Works Committee.
I will make a motion for approval of the agreement with B&E Construction on behalf of Public Works.
Lorman, second.
Thank you. Any discussion? I appreciate the addition of the section on vegetation removal to keep public roadways and sidewalks safe and convenient. I would also note the message we received from Kevin Spittler, a constituent of mine, regarding Green Mowers Madison, a company that's merging with other companies to become the largest green fleet in the state for landscaping and snow removal. Using a green fleet would be consistent with our renewable energy goal. So I hope for next year, this project and maybe sooner for others, we might be able to consider this particular new green mower. Okay, all those in favor of approving the agreement with B&E Construction and Remodeling for property maintenance services signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Moving on to the second agreement, consideration and potential action on specialized aviation service operations agreement with Capital Flight LLC. And this comes to us from the Airport Commission.
And Brian, were you going to?
I can speak on it once it's been moved on
safety.
the floor.
Okay, gotcha.
Who would like to move
Okay, so,
approval?
yep, Lorman would like to move approval.
Are we approving this or are we just considering it? I'm confused about it.
It'd be approval.
It would be approval?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll second.
Okay, discussion, starting with Brian.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So this came before the Airport Commission at their meeting earlier this month. The request was from Matt Hofelt from Capital Flight. Basically, he has had agreement with the city for a number of years. The agreement comes up for expiration, if you want to call it that, in 2024. In consideration of extending the agreement, he asked the city council and airport commission for consideration of a longer term of length of the agreement in its next iteration, mainly 15 years to better match the terms of the land leases that are out there for airport hangars for a number of reasons, including better matching the terms for the hangars. That helps him when he's going to get financing for improvements in his own infrastructure that's on his property or on the rental property there. The Airport Commission discussed this. They took two separate votes on the matter. One was a 4-1 vote to recommend the City Council consider incorporating the 15-year term that would start in April of 2024. And the second item was that if the council did in fact approve the 15-year term for this SASO agreement, that they, in the issue of being fair and equitable, that they also consider a separate 15-year term of agreement for the fixed-based operator contract that we have with Maury Aircrafts. For that service, that would be a separate item that we deal with at a separate time. But that was also approved by the Airport Commission on a 4-1 vote for council consideration as well.
Thank you. Alder Lorman or Jackson, is there anything you'd like to share from the Airport Commission meeting?
Sure. So, did some background research on this, just looking, comparatively at other FBO and SASO contracts. And 5 years is unusually short. Why? Don't know. So obviously up to this point, no one's really given it a lot of thought, or shall we say scrutiny. Looking, like Waukesha, for example, they have operator agreements out there that even go out to 30 years with entities, businesses, and operations. Checking with FAA regarding where they weigh in on this, which was interesting. There was no time frame listed or recommendation. Lots and lots and lots of language of what should be in these contracts. Obviously responsibility to the airport, maintenance, service, providing services, and things like that, but never got into time frame. So as we discussed it as a commission, what it really boiled down to is really just looking at the leases and say, well, okay, we have 15-year leases. There's businesses out there that are operating, just looking for some continuity. Capital Flight, has been a growing business and continues to be a growing business. So this sends a message to them and to, I guess, people they would work with for additional development in their business, that there's a commitment on our part. We did ask, and Brian, for city attorney review of this and got nothing back. So, nothing for or against it. It came back to us, So, yeah. And so I guess, that's what led us to say, okay, let's find a compromise. We realized that asking for 25 years off the top, as opposed to 5 being along at 5 years. So 15 was where we settled on. Matt.
Yeah, I guess I this is the first I've heard that it had previously been forwarded to us. I did review it
Okay,
as part of this packet, and
Yeah.
I had a few minor comments.
sure, please.
Of
course.
Just because I think there were a couple other provisions in the old agreement that when you turn this to 15, like the renewal language, and I think there's a few other things that can be tweaked, but nothing significant and nothing that has anything to do with a proposal to go to 15 years. I think just
Okay,
so to the extent the approval is going to go forward tonight, I guess I would ask it to be subject to final city attorney approval to allow a few of those tweaks to happen.
absolutely.
But
Yeah.
and I apologize if I don't know where the ball got dropped, but
Okay.
the first I saw it was the in the packet. So
Yeah, and I went out to the BOA to see if they had any guidance. And interestingly enough, the BOA has templates for these agreements. And interestingly enough, their template looked just like ours.
And they didn't have a term.
Nope, just a blank space. So clearly, we simply went out to the BOA to get our template, and who knows how long ago. So it doesn't seem to be anything really too complicated, but obviously, we have to have legal approval or review on this type of thing. Capital Flight has been a growing and developing business out there. They've raised this year $36,254 for nonprofit entities through their actions out at the airport. So I think they're a good steward in the community, and the airport is, I think, proven to be adaptable. The city wouldn't have its LEED certification if it wasn't for the airport taking on an unleaded fuel option. So clearly the city wasn't punished for having an airport, but it's what can the city do to show that it's being a good steward. And Capital Flight is innovative, and there is definitely innovation taking place in the general aviation industry. We are going to see, and there is now in the US, an all-electric training aircraft that is certified. So I think Middleton is in a good place to be an innovator, as long as we encourage it with people who are willing to be innovative in their business practices.
Thank you. Any comments? I have a few. So Matt, if you're taking notes for the review, of course, the equal benefits needs to be in there, but I'm sure you would catch that.
yeah, I flagged that one. That was one of mine.
Yeah. Page 27, under notices, it says all notices to either of the parties shall be addressed as follows, and it lists the city administrator from Middleton. But in section 3 on page 17, it says written notice of inability to provide services will be sent to the city clerk. And I think that is an error. It probably should just say to the city to be consistent throughout. That was page 17, section 3. page 23 of the packet. Thank you. So the right to flight language, which must be further down on the page. There we go. I think it's missing something. The part where it says, together with the right to cause in said airspace such noise as may be inherent in the operation of aircraft. We do have established voluntary noise abatement procedures, and I think we should mention those in this section. And I would propose saying, together with the right to cause in said airspace, comma, consistent with Middleton's established voluntary noise abatement procedures, comma, such noises may be inherent. I'm wondering about the default section on page 22. It says the occurrence of any of the following events shall constitute a default under this agreement. Section 10A2 says the operator's failure to observe, keep, or perform any of the other terms, covenants, agreements, or conditions of this agreement, or in the airport operating rules and regulations for a period of 10 days after written notice by Middleton shall constitute a default. Section 3 isn't mentioned explicitly, but that section says the operator has 3 months to remedy a deficiency in providing the listed services. So I don't know how you tighten that up, Matt, to make that more consistent. It seems like, you know, the period of 10 days versus we would give the operator has 3 months to correct deficiencies in this section. I think that it makes sense. It would take longer than 10 days to correct deficiencies, but I think there just should be consistency or at least not a contradiction.
Perhaps I'll take a closer look at it, but perhaps what it needs there is unless otherwise specifically provided.
Yes, that would be good. And then page 30, the term, now this is in the original agreement, but it's similar. The wording is the same in the new one. So under payments by operator to Middleton, I'm fine with extending these to 15 years and, for both the SASO and also the FBO. It says in the original, and that this language has carried over into the new one, rental occupancy charges shall be a subject for discussion between Middleton and operator if operator seeks to renew this agreement. Shall is required to me. So was there discussion of rental occupancy charges?
Not as of present.
I think that conversation should take place. I also think it says shall, so I don't know why it wouldn't. And in the new agreement, the reference to the 5-year initial term of this agreement will need to be changed.
That was one of the things I commented on as well. It didn't seem to be totally congruent with.
Yeah. But I do want to preserve the option. I think after the first 5 years of the new agreement, this discussion should take place about whether to charge. My concern about locking into a 15-year agreement and foregoing the opportunity for the city to change its mind or, circumstances change and we need to charge a fee or at least have that conversation. I would want it to specify that after 5 years, we shall have that discussion.
What about just what do we rent? What is being rented? I'm just sort of curious. It's a
That I don't know, but if
Yeah, I
it
mean-
says in the contract that, or in the agreement that,
well, I'm just curious. I don't know. What is being rented? Payment by operator. No, Middleton shall not charge operator. I don't know what's.
Yeah, I mean, as you can see, under the structure of the previous contract, we have sort of this, it's a 5-year term with an option to essentially renegotiate another 5-year term, which
Okay,
didn't like much. Or
I mean,
didn't think it made much sense, but in the context of that paragraph, 2A basically says for the initial term, whatever rental occupancy charges you might be referring to there will not be charged. And really, this is just another place where we say, hey, when we talk about this for a 5-year renewal, occupancy charges are going to be a topic and we'll talk about it. But it really, in the context of the old agreement, in my view, didn't really have much effect other than to sort of be a marker to say, hey, remember what we talked about, and sort of set the stage for the future negotiations, but didn't really have any real contractual binding effect, so to speak. So that's why I had a question of how exactly that provision really operated. Now that you talk about a 15, does this provision gets changed to 15? And I understand at least one member does not think so, and that makes sense. But I think that's an important discussion to have. Is
well, and
how
I'm
that
just
is
wondering,
gonna-
if the so it sounds like we have two things really here. One is, okay, 15 years is not so much of an issue, but maybe there's just old language or archaic language or some kind of language in the contract that isn't even relevant or reflects what is going on right now at the airport or how the businesses are, how the SASO is operated. But I don't want us to open a can of worms and just say, oh, we're going to change everything here. I mean, if it ain't broke, let's not fix it. And the other comment I would say is whatever we do put in here, just keep in mind that whatever the FAA says overrides anything we put here. So it doesn't matter. And a good example is like the noise. So noise abatement is only noise abatement cannot be enforced. Noise abatement pattern is just a recommendation to pilots to fly and observe this. But keep in mind, at any time, a pilot can simply decide not to follow it because it's a safety issue, or there's an emergency, or there could be any number of reasons a pilot doesn't follow a noise abatement procedure. Pilots are instructed to fly what's called pattern and alignment with a runway and things like that. So every time, we can draft all the things we want into this, but Capital Flight cannot enforce a noise abatement pattern in any way whatsoever.
And that's why I specifically mentioned the voluntary nature of our noise abatement procedures. And I think if we can't even ask our, have basically the city's policy that we want all aviators, but especially our FBO and our SASO companies to make a good faith effort to follow the voluntary noise abatement procedures whenever possible. If we can't even specify that, why do we even have the voluntary noise abatement procedures?
Well, because the noise abatement procedure is published in the FAA documentation that all pilots are required to read before they fly the airplane.
Yep.
So FAA states by law, the pilot cannot and should not fly until they have read all known information available to them regarding the airspace they're operating in. So what it means is you do not take off until you've read all the procedures that are published for that airport, and you do not land until you've read all those procedures that are published for that airport. And so that's the very first thing. If a pilot has an encounter with an FAA official, the FAA official is going to say, have you briefed yourself on everything that involves the operation of this airport? And if the pilot says, well, I don't know, then the city of Middleton, the SASO, the FBO, nobody can enforce that. It's between the pilot breaking rules of engagement for that airspace.
Are you opposing the addition of a reference to our voluntary noise abatement procedure?
Well,
I see this as a nod to our neighbors who have.
I agree with you. It's a nod to our neighbors, but the problem with the nod to the neighbors is this is all we ever do is nod to them. And I think in a larger context, what we ask in all these types of agreements is to simply be mindful and observant to, everything around the city. So we can't use things like enforce or require pilots do anything regarding noise abatement. We can simply say that the pilots make them aware of all published information involving our airport. I think.
Yep. And maybe I need to repeat what my suggestion was. It's simply to add consistent with Middleton's established voluntary noise abatement procedures. There's nothing about enforce. There's nothing about require. It's actually saying there's a right to create noise in said airspace consistent with our established voluntary noise abatement procedures.
Sure. I just so you understand a functional equivalent of this, it's no different than a business that is on University Avenue. And we're saying to that business, you need to go out there and you need to put a sign up and say, you need to slow down and follow the speed limit when you pass in front of my business. We all know it's posted, but you need to follow it because someone is telling me this is what I have to do in conjunction to operating my business. I need to enforce this or promote this or make note of it. I think what's really important is that the SASL agreement needs to reflect what we expect out of them as a business operator at the airport. And I don't know how we can tell them to.
Well, let me just go back to the language. It says Middleton reserves unto itself a right of flight.
Mhm.
So this isn't actually making the capital flight, or I don't know if this is in the FBO agreement as well, but it is a statement that Middleton does this.
Okay, put the language in there. But just understand that pilots are going to do what pilots are going to do.
That's very well understood.
Okay.
I also had two more things. One, a question, hours of operation on page 24. What are the hours of operation? It says that the schedule shall be filed with and approved by the Middleton Airport Commission. Has this been done?
I have to check the files and see if they've previously filed. I don't have it
Okay.
accessible.
And then also another provision that just occurred to me, it did say that the operator is supposed to file a written notice of a desire to extend the agreement at least 1 year prior to the termination of the current agreement. Did that happen? Written notice filed?
They did it as a verbal notice as part of a meeting about a year and a half prior to the expiration.
But nothing written?
No.
Okay, I would just ask that these provisions be either enforced or modified if they're not going to occur. And then finally, it's good to hear that thanks to the airport, we got LEED certified because one of the things I wanted to bring up is environmental regulations. This isn't a regulation, but the airport is city property. And so it too is subject to the goal of achieving 100% renewable energy by the year 2050. In fact, as a city property, it should actually be striving to meet 66% of all operational energy needs with renewable energy by 2030, 88% by 2035, and 100% by 2040. And I would love to see our contracts and agreements and leases include provisions regarding things like this. I'm not suggesting we make this change now, but if this is a 15-year agreement, it's a missed opportunity to at least mention somewhere in here, just like the right of flight, Middleton reserves unto itself this right. I could imagine adding a statement saying Middleton has this policy and this is a city property, and leave it up to the operator to decide what that means and what to do about it.
Well, maybe someday something like that's achievable, but I don't think we can enforce our environmental will on a business operator because they can only do and operate what's available to them. So right now, they're using the three sources of fuel that airplanes can run, which is low lead fuel, one blend of unleaded fuel, or Jet A or a kerosene. Now, the industry is developing sustainable aviation fuel, which will be the kerosene or Jet A fuel. There is some trials of it going on. But again, for that type of thing to be used, it really has to pass what are called ASTM standards. And that means the industry themselves have to test these newer fuels and blends in the airplanes that are out there to simply make sure they're safe airframes. I think given the size of our airport and the progressiveness of the operators on the airport, there's absolute willingness to adopt what we can. Unleaded fuel is actually preferred by pilots. It's better for the engines. The leaded fuel creates lead deposits, which result in plug fouling and all kinds of interesting mechanical problems. And running unleaded fuel in the engines actually prolongs their life and reliability of the engines. So we're really just stuck by what when an airplane is built, it comes with really a birth certificate, and that certificate simply states what you can and can't put in the fuel tank and in the motor.
Yep.
And that's it.
Well, and I think in the near term, things like putting solar on buildings, eliminating gas appliances for heat and water heat, things like that can be accomplished. And I would hope.
Well, I would
it's good.
imagine new construction would reflect that.
Yep.
I would hope.
Or even taking advantage of Inflation Reduction Act opportunities. So if my colleagues on the Airport Commission can sort of nudge people in that direction, that would be wonderful. But in the meantime, we have to do something with this agreement. We have a motion and a second to approve it the way it was. We at least need to add subject to final city attorney review and approval. So I'm going to make a motion. I move that we approve the Specialized Aviation Services operations agreement with Capital Flight LLC, subject to final city attorney review and approval, incorporating the changes to the language regarding the rental occupancy charges and consideration after 5 years. The change to make section 3, how do I say this? To make section 3 and section 10 not contradict one another. The addition of the reference to the wording consistent with Middleton's established voluntary noise abatement procedures in the right to flight language, and changing the reference to the city clerk in section 3 to say just the city. And I'm not going to mention the equal benefits because I know Matt's already got that. So that is my motion.
I will second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the Specialized Aviation Service Operations Agreement with Capital Flight LLC, subject to final city attorney review and approval with the changes noted, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
All right, moving on to ordinances. We have one ordinance to update section 3.01 relating to update of budget process ordinance. This comes to us from the L&O committee.
This is Wilkes. I'll move approval of the ordinances to update the budget process.
Thank you.
Laura Mennel, second that.
Thank you. All right, this was a great catch. Bill, any discussion? I did bring up a couple of minor changes, changing the reference to section 6 to actually say section 5 right there. I think that was it. And then the stray quotation mark at the very end.
Yeah, those
Anything
changes,
else?
that's already been made and
Great.
forwarded.
Okay, thank you. Then all those in favor of approving the ordinance to update section 3.01 relating to update of budget process ordinance signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Moving on to the budget. 2024 budget discussions and deliberations is our first action. Thank you to Brian and Bill for the updated numbers in the tables. The revenues are now balanced with expenditures at $25,528,065, which is great because last time we had a gap of almost $1.5 million. Would either of you like to give us a 2-minute walk through this?
Sure, I can cover that just briefly. So the tables that are included include the changes that were discussed by the Finance Committee at the previous meeting. So that is both to the operating budget, the capital, as well as the ARPA funding. There are some additional changes that are laid out in the memo included in the packet that I have up on the screen. It's typical during the budget process that we get additional information as we get closer. It's typical as we go through the budget process that we get updated information. So 2 of the additional revenue numbers that have come in since the previous meeting are the numbers for the state road aids from the Wisconsin Department of Transportation and the payment for municipal services from the Department of Administration. Between those 2, that's an additional $109,057. The largest change is in state road aids. Part of that is due to additional state funding. A large part of that is also due to our 6-year average costs going up with a lower cost year dropping off and a higher year coming on. The recommendation is to allocate those additional revenues by addressing 3 items. The first is to increase the transfer to the proposed newly created transit fund by $100,000. The original proposed budget actually recommended decreasing that by $100,000, looking at the additional state aid funding that we received in 2023 in our current agreement. But based on some additional information that has come from Madison Metro, we're anticipating that may be needed in the transit fund. We'll have more information on that at a future meeting, but recommendation for now is to maintain that transfer to give us some more flexibility. Second item is increasing the benefits for the municipal court by $1,004. That's related to the increase in compensation for the resolution. So that would be depending on the outcome of that resolution at the council. And then the final is making an addition to the personnel contingency, which would provide a little bit larger pool of funds that could be allocated at a future meeting if needed. These changes have also been incorporated into the totals. Included on your packet are those updated sheets for the general fund revenues and expenditures, the capital items, operating decision items, and the ARPA funding. And then just mentioning that the next item on the budget is related to the public hearing notice. So there is a draft public hearing notice included that reflects both the numbers discussed at the previous meeting, as well as the additional changes in the memo. If there are any other changes by the Finance Committee, we can update that prior to publishing the public hearing notice.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, so let's walk through this. Let's start with the operating budget. Just first of all, it's great news about the state road aids. Any discussion of revenues or expenditures in the operating budget? I'm intrigued and happy to hear about the pool of funds for compensation adjustments for personnel. That's a good idea. I have no further changes to the operating budget. Hearing none, let's move on to the capital budget. This too, and glad to see that we've come in at the $4 million level. I did have one change to propose, and that is on page 55 of the packet. Wait. No, that's not page 55. Wait. Where did it go? There we go. Sorry, I was in the wrong section. Page 57 of the packet. So we do have $380,000 budgeted for the Kenyon resurfacing. I again propose that we can reconsider this just because the shape of the road is not as bad as many other streets within Middleton. And I'd be interested in hearing from my colleagues on that.
You're right. There's lots of streets in Middleton, and we can revisit the 5-year plan all you want. And we can each go to battle for each street in our neighborhood if you want to. But the 5-year plan is something that is on an ongoing basis that we review through Public Works. And this was on there. And I would argue that we need to address the street situation, especially in these neighborhoods where nothing has happened since the flooding from several years ago. And we have no idea what kind of effect that might have had.
Well, and just to be clear, I'm not suggesting we scrap it from the whole plan. I'm suggesting it be postponed until 2025.
My question would be, and I guess this is really more of a projection issue regarding this. So the ARPA money is going away, and it's been very useful, obviously. And I'm looking at Bill for some guidance. We move something like this off. Now the ARPA money's gone. Now we still have this large expense out there. You know, where are we at what point in time in the best position to get this done? The mayor made it very clear, you know, that we're not going to play too many games with moving. That's not your problem. Too many games with moving street repair around. The street has to eventually get repaired. So as Alder Hanairo is asking, well, next year, this year, Sean, is it an engineering issue? You know, if we don't do it now, and we wait, you know, what types of problems are we looking at? Damage to the infrastructure underneath the street, water infiltration, damaging sewer lines, water lines, disrupting infrastructure from that way. I'm not an engineer, I don't know. I just want us to do what makes sense. I absolutely understand. We have constituents and they are tired of rough, bumpy streets and that are not in good shape. But so I'm looking for some technical guidance.
Sean, would you like to share some technical guidance? And I don't think I would describe this as rough and bumpy. I think, is it Hillcrest that is on the other side of Parmenter that continues Kenyon? That is bumpy and rough.
Right, so a couple of things. Number one, I would consider the worst streets to be candidates for reconstruction, which is a different class of treatment than resurfacing for us. So it tends to cost more per square foot to reconstruct a road than to simply resurfacing. And part of what we want to capture.
Is your microphone on?
Thanks for noticing.
So a resurface now is less expensive than a potential over time where it could have to be a reconstruction.
Per square foot, we get a better bang for our buck resurfacing things than we do reconstructing them. And the longer we wait, annual degradation accelerates. So it doesn't happen all in 1 year. It happens over a period of time, but we have sort of a generic curve, if you will, at their newest part of the life cycle. A little bit of money in surface treatment does a lot of good in extending life. Someplace in that mid-range, we start looking at resurfacing, just putting a new coat of blacktop, just the top, wearing a layer of blacktop on it relatively quickly and inexpensively can do a lot of good for prolonging its life. Once we get near the end, we might as well wait as long as we reasonably can, because it can only get so bad. And what we have to do with it is reconstruct it, which is our heaviest hammer, if you will. So we want to capture some of these mid-grade roads while they're still candidates for being resurfaced.
Okay.
Again, it's not any one particular year. So if something gets pushed back by a year, that's not usually a red flag for us. But when you look at all of the resurfacing candidates, what you don't want to do is just keep pushing things back a little bit at a time, because other things then start to fall into reconstruction in the big picture.
Okay, well, that's what I wanted to hear. And I guess in my opinion, then, waiting a year or not waiting a year, then just my opinion, then we get it over with and we get the street resurfaced. Because a year isn't going to make a difference. And next year, we're going to have new financial challenges for other stuff that has to get done. So
Sean-
maybe we fix it this year, stay on track, get it done. And, that's why I'm asking for a professional opinion. I can drive down the street in my car and go, well, okay. But I don't want,
Yeah, so and probably for more history than anyone wants, but I'll keep it brief. In 2017, the council looked at what would it cost for life cycle replacements of all of our city streets to keep them in reasonably good condition throughout their life. And we came up with a figure someplace in the ballpark of $2.6 million. We settled on trying to budget. The city council tried to settle on targeting a budget of $2 million per year then for streets. And frankly, staff is having a hard time keeping up with that number. But at that, we're doing much, much better than historically we had been doing, which was always, what do we have? What can we get done for this amount of money, whatever it was? And some years that number was zero, and somehow we got surprised we fell into a hole that we've been digging out of ever since. So I think we're doing really well, even with this target. And again, in any one year, it's not going to torpedo the overall goal here. If it starts to become a trend, that would be of concern.
Sean, can I ask, given the number of projects, because I'm looking at the Parmenter Street reconstruction, that 4.6 million was budgeted last year for this year, and it's back.
Mhm.
Given the number of projects, both in streets and elsewhere in public works, what's the likelihood that something like the Kenyon resurfacing, which is number 11 on the list, what's the likelihood that that won't get done in 2024 if it is budgeted for?
Yeah, it's a good question. Resurfacing doesn't tend to take a lot of staff time, mostly because this is money largely spent to the contractor, not on design or engineering per se. It's zipping off the top course of asphalt, fixing utilities that need fixing, and putting it back together. So it tends to go pretty quickly without a lot of design effort. So I'm not as concerned when I see resurfacing as chewing up staff time as design, reconstruction. Those really require an awful lot of time.
Okay. Well, my thought in suggesting that we postpone this one for a year is simply that it is a big ticket item. With the $380,000 taken out, we would have money to put towards the replacement of all three of the mock overhead doors instead of just the one, which is staying in the budget. That was $140,000 expense, and now we're just replacing one at $50,000. So we could avoid some maintenance costs there. Also, interest rates are high, so this could be a good year not to go with the full $4 million that is typically the target. And we did go $600,000 over in our borrowing last year to make room for the Pheasant Branch Conservancy
The creek
repairs.
corridor, sure.
Yeah, so that was my reason for seeking discussion on whether we could postpone this project until 2025.
So one of my questions is how do we prioritize when we're resurfacing and we're doing this work? I mean, is it a street that you could just drive on, it's bumpy, or is it a street? Because I've been on some streets in Middleton, I wouldn't drive my car on at all. Because I would not struts damage, I wouldn't. So is the street you could drive on, is just bumpy, or we just can't put a car can't drive a block on this street?
Yeah, no, those are the worst of the worst that you're describing, but that's not the target for resurfacing. The target for resurfacing is to catch something before it gets to that, while we can still do it at a fairly low cost per surface area. Once it gets that bad, all hope is lost. We completely start over, and that gets pricey.
Okay, so, and this is something that we see no way of just putting it off for a year.
I do see a way of putting it off for a year, and that's a policy decision. That's I fully understand. This is what you're wrestling with. You know, what's the best way to guide the city through what we're going through. And I can't tell you from an engineering perspective that any one road cannot wait one more year.
Well, yeah, I'm satisfied with what you've taught me tonight, and I appreciate that. So, I've been, prior to being on this council, have certainly been following city and progress or lack thereof of roads. And as a citizen, at times have become quite frustrated with things getting pushed off and pushed off and pushed off. And I just don't know how we're going to look next year. I'm just a bit concerned about that. And the resurfacing is, in my opinion, then really a lower cost alternative to maybe dealing with something more costly down the road.
Okay, so it sounds like support for keeping Kenyon in. Yeah. Well, if 2 or 4, that's support for keeping it in.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Any other capital budget items? All right, moving on to the ARPA budget, noting the time. Any comments, questions?
So where did we leave off on? It wasn't in the ARPA budget. Yes, it is. So where do we leave off on the support for mom housing stability? Are we going to send this to the Common Council for a decision on a $20,000 increase?
That was the request. And I would just note it's no longer mom, it's Way Forward Resources.
Yeah, so either way, that has to be fixed in the documentation. I have a fundamental problem with the city getting involved in funding any faith-based organization.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt right there. It is not a faith-based organization. That is one of the reasons they changed their name from Middleton Outreach Ministry, because they have not been a faith-based organization for years.
Okay. And, the other thing is, if we're going to fund one, we have to fund them all. I get it that they're funding, that they say that the money that we give them is used for the residents of Middleton, or isn't it? Is it used for the broader community? Is this money just going to specifically provide housing assistance to the people of Middleton only, and food assistance to the people of Middleton only? Or is this money going to anybody who shows up at Way Forward seeking assistance?
I can answer that. And first, I would just note that Way Forward Resources is not like any other nonprofit in Middleton. We do not have a housing authority in Middleton. Way Forward Resources meets that need. Our budget includes a category for health and human services, and the only city entity that meets this need is the senior center. And as we heard from Tammy Derrickson of the senior center, if we're going to increase the amount of money for housing stability and food security, she would recommend that it go to Way Forward because it can serve people of all ages, not just people 55 and older. In 2022, Way Forward Resources served over 6,600 house or people. Around half of those are from Middleton. That is more than any other time in their history. They spent $2.6 million on food security, including delivering food to seniors who don't have cars. They spent $711,000 on housing stability, and they have 5 full-time staff case managers who are dedicated to housing. So it is not, I hear people refer to it as moms, which kind of makes it seem like it's just a little shop, where people can go and pick up a few things. It is a very, very complex social service organization that just happens to be a nonprofit. Our senior center is phenomenal. The senior center refers people to Way Forward Resources, as does the school district. They partner all the time. And our predecessor selected Way Forward to provide $60,000 in ARPA funding to help provide our residents with housing security. It's an appropriate use of these funds. And frankly, many of our residents couldn't live here in Middleton if it weren't for the housing assistance and the food security that they receive through Way Forward Resources. And these are people who work here, whose kids go to school here, people who are aging in place here. Previous council agreed to pay $60,000 of our ARPA funding to Way Forward Resources. My suggestion is simply to increase that amount in 2024 by another $20,000. So that would increase the total amount of ARPA funding that Way Forward would receive to 1/3 more than what a previous council already budgeted. And I would add that Sun Prairie actually funds the Sunshine Place, which is their nonprofit equivalent of Way Forward Resources. They coordinate social services and address the ongoing and emergent human service needs of the city and its residents. And they fund that through their tax levy.
And I appreciate that eloquent explanation, but it still doesn't change the fact that we're using our money and we're supporting people who are not citizens of this town.
That is simply not true. That is not true. Can they segregate and say this is the line for Middleton residents and this is the line for not Middleton residents?
Well, if you
No.
have an address
But
in Middleton,
But when they write checks for things like the security deposit or to help people avoid eviction, they can tally how much is going to residents of Middleton, actual city
I
residents.
appreciate it. My
And
question is,
I'm telling you that $20,000, that extra $20,000 is not enough to cover even the need for the Middleton residents.
right, but what I'm saying is we're not spending all that money in Middleton on Middleton residents. And that's what it boils down to for me at the end of, sorry.
Yeah, just to clarify, as part of the subrecipient agreement we have with the organization, they do have to provide us a list of the individual addresses where assistance was provided, and it's specified that that is provided to Middleton residents. So the 20,000 per year we've been providing, they're documenting that that has been spent on Middleton residents.
So all this money is going to City of Middleton residents, not outside of it. Every dollar that we are,
The city has been providing.
yes, yeah. So if we're gonna, if we're gonna vote on and we're gonna increase the assistance to $80,000 will be coming back to the residents of Middleton in housing assistance or food, or just in need of something. It's not going to people who are outside the city of Middleton.
that if the terms of the current subrecipient agreement are held forward and the funding amount is increased, that's my understanding that would be correct.
You understand, but you don't know for sure.
Well,
I don't know how more clearly he can state it.
Well, it's yes or no.
Well, the current agreement is for 20,000. What I'm saying is we would need to amend the agreement, but if the other terms of the agreement would stay the same, then the answer is yes.
Okay, so moving forward, if we agree to increase it to $80,000, we then can amend the agreement to simply say that $80,000 must also be spent in the city of Middleton on its residents for food, housing, and assistance. And it can't go to anybody who's not a resident.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
I can get behind that.
Okay.
I just sort of say that, and I'm on board with Alder Hanaro because I'm involved in the Cromley Middle School in my district, and they're giving out food bags for kids who are hungry. And Way Forward is helping. Way Forward is helping with that. I've linked with the principal there who has the concerns about children not being able to eat in Middleton. And I got with my company, Chili's in Madison, and we're giving out free kids meals for kids to come because they're struggling with feeding children that are not being able to eat or go home and eat after school or even at home. And he did mention that Way Forward is a big support and helping them to get children fed. So they're definitely doing, but he did express that there's just not enough help that Way Forward can do to help them out. So that's why I partnered with them to make sure that, and I think I just recently gave them 5,000 flyers of kids eat meals free if they bring their parents over to Chili's, because I would love to see the children eating in Middleton.
Thank you for sharing that, Alder Jackson. All right, any further discussion of the ARPA budget? And thank you, Alder Lorman, for a robust discussion, as the mayor would say. All right, hearing no further discussion. Bill, you don't need us to take action on the budget.
Well, I think that it may be appropriate for one motion to recommend the budget reflective of all these changes, if that's the will of the committee, and then that would be the recommendation that would be going to the council at the special meeting at the date to be set with the public hearing.
Okay, who would like to make that motion?
I'll make a motion that we accept the, which we call
How did you
this?
phrase it, Bill?
To recommend the budget inclusive of the changes that are reflected in the sheets, recommend the budget to the common council.
So we recommend this current budget inclusive of the changes as
On the packet.
on the packet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Changes in the packet. Okay, who would like to second?
This is Jackson. I'll second it.
Thank you. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion to recommend the budget inclusive of the changes shown in the packet of October 17th, signify by, recommend to council, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. And our last item of business is direction regarding the publication of the notice for the 2024 budget public hearing. The proposed date is Monday, November 13th at 7 p.m. That is the same day as a Public Works meeting, but I understand that that Public Works Committee meeting will likely start at 6 and have a light agenda to get us out in time, because Alder Wilkes and I are both on Public Works.
I'd have said yes, but I'll come over here and say yes.
Thank you. All right, any discussion? If not, who would like to move that we set the date of the 2024 budget public hearing for November 13th at 7 p.m.?
This is Jackson. I'll move that we set that date.
Thank you.
This is Wilkes, I'll second.
Thank you. All right, further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of setting the date of the 2024 budget public hearing on Monday, November 13th at 7 p.m. signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. We've reached the end of our agenda and we are adjourned. Thank you.